Hey everyone. On January 20th, I resigned my position at EPA. I was required to because of the incoming administration. But when I was there, my team and I worked on literally thousands of projects and programs, working to make sure that air was cleaner, that water quality was improving, and that harmful chemicals were taken out of the ground so they didn't disturb the drinking water or weren't a hazard to human health. And many of these projects were DEIA or environmental justice related projects. And I just wanted to take a minute and tell you, as somebody who was in the field, practicing this stuff, what environmental justice and DEIA are and what they are not. What they are is basic human decency, basic fairness. It's not some radical agenda. It's not anything that really any reasonable person would disagree with. And it's kind of about what this country is about, that we have free enterprise, that we live together in community, but we also are really concerned with fairness and that, everybody has a decent quality of life and we all have a responsibility to keep an eye out for each other. And in my years at EPA, we did that by engaging with people who have not historically been at the table and people who had not been treated fairly. And sometimes this was people of color, maybe often people of color, but absolutely not always. What we found is that it could be folks from all sorts of ethnic backgrounds, but there was two common denominators, especially with environmental justice, two common denominators. One is lower income, and these could be individuals or communities that were facing hard times through no fault of their own, usually bigger forces that created economic conditions that were tougher, or historic unfairness that made sure only certain people could live in the toughest and dirtiest places. The second common denominator is political power. These are people in places where they didn't often have access to power, or they lost that access to power. And as a result, they were facing more pollution and more public health impacts than the rest of us do in the middle and upper classes, things we all take for granted. And in these places, and again, they could be, black and brown communities or white communities, the conditions that they were facing were off the charts. We're talking cancer rates that are 3 or 4 times the rate of others. Where on a block, every other house, or sometimes more than that, had somebody who suffered from some kind of cancer and died early. Lower life expectancy. In some zip codes and in some neighborhoods, life expectancy was 20 years or more different from more wealthier places not that far away. Or kids and the elderly having respiratory issues way above and beyond what middle class folks usually face. In some cases, 80% of kids struggled to breathe with asthma. So these are conditions, again, not any fault of their own. People just happen to live or grow up in a certain place that hadn't been treated fairly over time. So what we did in those years at EPA was, through environmental justice programs, just tried to pay attention to those places that haven't been treated fairly, that haven't been at the table, that haven't been heard, that were often forgotten, and to show up there and to help and to direct resources and technical assistance to solve these problems that, many of us completely take for granted and have no idea what it's like. And me personally, I did more than 400, about 450 external engagements in places, and some of them were urban, some of them were suburban, and some of them were rural. Some of them were in super Democratic blue places, and some of them were in super Republican, deep red places. And my team and I were involved in some cases, to listen and just kind of understand issues, and in other cases, to try to help with the resources that the EPA had under our statutory authority and through our funding to help get it to the places that need it the most. And regardless of where we went, again, it could be an urban Democratic area, it could be a rural Republican area. People said thank you for showing up, regardless of whether it was a community of color or a predominantly white community. Everybody said, hey, this is a concern that we've had for a long time, that we've been working on and have been trying to fix. And we've just been wanting a little bit of help because we don't have the resources. And in some cases, a water system, whether it's a drinking water system or a wastewater system, that could be 40, 50, $100 million investment. And for a small community, they just can't do it, especially places that are working class, especially places that are losing population, losing ratepayers. And their only hope is that government, and the government is here in a democratic republic to represent the people in the society, to look out for them and to make sure that they have a basic quality of life and can have basic expectations for public health for themselves and their families. And that's what we did. Again, more than 450 events that I was involved in personally, but that EPA around the country is engaged in thousands and thousands of times over. And I've been in rooms, I'm a Democrat, served in the Democratic administration, but probably about half of my meetings were in Republican places. In some cases, I was in rooms where a lot of people were wearing Trump hats and Trump T-shirts. And, regardless of, whether it was a room like that or a different kind of room, we shook hands, we talked, and we tried to figure things out. And we got resources to places that needed the most for the quality of life that they deserve. And we made a big difference, in a lot of cases. And you can look it up, the former president said many times that more money and resources were spent in Republican places than Democratic places, because our job is to serve the people regardless of party, regardless of how a certain county voted. So I bring all this to your attention because on January 24th, a memo was issued by the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM, under the new administration. So January 24th, and its subject is Guidance Regarding RIFs of DEIA Offices. And RIFs, for those of you who aren't familiar, means reduction in force, which means basically layoffs, cutting people, firing people, terminating positions. And I won't read the whole thing to you, but you could look it up. But I'll read second paragraph. Each agency, department, or commission head shall take action to terminate to the maximum extent allowed by law all DEI, DEIA, and environmental justice offices and positions within 60 days. Now, I know that our public discourse is extremely toxic, and there's a lot of misinformation and misrepresentation. But few things are more misrepresented than those terms, DEIA and environmental justice. It is not about giving preferences to people who don't deserve it. It's about including people who have been historically underrepresented and marginalized. And it could be folks of color or it could be white folks. Like I say, it's two common denominators: low income and lack of political power. And all across the spectrum, we find that. And that has been the focus. And it wasn't just the Biden focus, but that is kind of what this country has been about for a long time, at least in its best eras. And that's what the Environmental Protection Agency has always been about. Just ensuring a basic quality of life where people can live in good health for themselves and their families. So I'm raising this because there's a lot of crazy stuff in the news. It's really hard to keep track of all the bonkers things that are happening. But this memo has been lost so far. And it really, really matters to folks on all sides of the spectrum. So I urge our leaders to back off of this commitment to fire what's going to end up being maybe 2,000 employees all around the country that are working in disadvantaged places. This is not a political issue. If the new administration wants to change the vocabulary or rename the offices, do what you got to do, but look out for the people, because the people are what matters the most, more than any political party and more than any president. So thank you for hearing me out. If you can forward this to somebody in power or somebody in Congress and ask them to protect these positions, because they matter for the people who need them the most. Thank you so much.